everybody, and most welcome to Drottning Kristinas väg 37 and the Folke Bernadotte Academy and our commemoration today of Count Folke Bernadotte. And I'm really proud to stand here today in front of you because it has been a tradition now since some years back that we are commemorating Folke Bernadotte on this very day. He was, as you know, assassinated in 1948 in Jerusalem on the 17th of September. My name is Sven-Erik Söder, and I'm the Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy. And as you probably know, the Folke Bernadotte Academy, or the FBA, we are the Swedish government agency responsible for issues related to peace, security, and development. I'm also really proud to welcome our prominent panelists that are going to take the floor later on under the safe management, if I put it that way, of our moderator, my colleague Marcus Sterblom. But before we turn to the panel and to the topic of today, I would like to say a few words about Folke Bernadotte and the legacy of this great man. If we think about it, I think it's obvious that Folke Bernadotte, in many respects, was ahead of his time. Maybe he was 50 years ahead of his time. And in many, many respects, when I have read about Bernadotte, it has struck me that even when it comes, to the family life, I think he was ahead of his time. He had two sons, Folke Jr. and Bertil, and he was very, very determined to raise the two sons in a different way that was common in the 40s. He said that I think fellowship between parents and children is much, much better and much, much more important than discipline. And this is, 45, stated by Folke Bernadotte. And I think his way of living, his personality as a private person, as a father, as a husband, was also, of course, important for his work abroad in different peace missions worldwide. Because I think you are who you are, and that is really important. But he was also, I think, ahead of his time in many, many other respects. As a chairman of the Swedish Red Cross, he showed that non-governmental organizations can propel a society as a whole in the right direction, but also play an important role therein. It was important in the 40s, and it's still very, very important. And I think we have still much, much to do to give our civil society and the non-governmental organizations its due role, both on the national scene, but also when it comes to international affairs. But talking about Folke Bernadotte, I think it goes without saying that he is most famous for his management or leadership of the so-called White Buses expeditions in the last months of the Second World War. Folke Bernadotte said that, and he saw that the Swedish Red Cross could be used as a sort of cover to carry out humanitarian rescue missions in the end of the Second World War in the still Nazi Germany. And he arranged this expedition in a very, very efficient way. And he not only helped many, many Scandinavian prisoners, people, from the resistance movement in Norway and Denmark. He also freed as many Jews as possible from the Nazi death camps in the end of the war. And I think it's also fair to say that as a direct result of the White Buses expedition, the first Secretary General of the very young and new world organization, the United Nations, the first Secretary General, the Norwegian Trygve Lie, appointed Folke Bernadotte due to the fact that Bernadotte headed the White Buses expedition. And when Folke Bernadotte was appointed as the first ever mediator in the United Nations in the spring 1948, he accepted, of course, a very, very complex mission. The situation in the Middle East was already then extremely complex. And Folke Bernadotte, he didn't know that much about the region. But anyway, he accepted the question from Trygve Lie. And the reason he accepted was that he felt that this mission was simply too important to reject. But his analysis, however, was also very realistic. And to quote Folke Bernadotte, he said that, "I think my chances of succeeding is 1 in 100. But still, he accepted this challenge. And when he was in the Middle East, I think we can also say that he became a pioneer, because he developed, in the end of the 40s, some very, very, I would say, innovative tools when it comes to working for peace. And it's interesting to see that what Folke Bernadotte invented in the end of the 40s is still in practice, is still in use in the United Nations of today. He formulated a concept for negotiation and mediation. He established the first ever peace operation within the United Nations, and that operation is still up and running, UNTSO, based in Jerusalem. And he also developed a concept for relief and recovery. Further on, I think if we go back and try to see some lines in the life of Folke Bernadotte, at least we can see two distinct ideas that he carried along with him during his life. Firstly, I think it's interesting to see that Bernadotte, he really understood the importance of international engagement. And before the word globalization was used, I think we can say that Folke Bernadotte was truly a global citizen. And when he worked, he had everyone in mind, and that was wherever he worked, from the White Buses expedition to his work in Israel and Palestine. And I think also it's interesting to see that, his motivation to take on this extremely difficult but important mission was not that he was aiming for fame or for recognition. I think it was on the contrary. I think it was the importance of the task that really convinced him to give peace a try in the Middle East in the end of the 40s. Secondly, he also understood the importance to dare to think along different lines, or think outside the box, as we say today, because he felt that was necessary in order to solve complex and serious problems. And just to give you one example, very, very early, he advocated what we today call the concept of comprehensive approach. And that was long before the concept even was coined, not invented. But he saw and he felt that it was a huge need for developing methods and mechanisms for civilian and military cooperation in order to reach the desired outcomes on the field and within the framework of peace operations. Bernadotte worked hard, and after a short while, he presented his first peace plan. It was a failure. He was not always successful. But I think it's also important to notice that he was open-minded, he was flexible, and he was not at all prestigious. He was able to listen, and he was able to change. And I think that is two abilities that are as important as ever in politics of today, in our time. So, conclude, I think all of us here today, 2016, we still have a lot to learn from Folke Bernadotte. And of course, it goes also without saying that the characteristics of conflicts today is so different from the conflicts in the 40s and during the Cold War. And new conditions is also putting peace mediators, negotiators, in front of new challenges in our time. Today, I think to be a mediator, to be a negotiator, has more or less been transformed into a sort of profession. Behind every individual mediator, there is often an entire team of really, really highly trained advisors and analysts. And we don't only have mediators working on behalf of international organizations like the United Nations, the European Union, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We have also mediators working on behalf of different regional organizations in the world, and even private actors. But regardless of who we are working for, I think we also have some challenges in common. As the number of mediators, as the number of players grows, so does the need for coordination and cooperation. And it is getting more and more important, I think, also to try whatever we can to include, to involve all paths of societies in our work for peace. We have to address the right issues, and we have also to include the right people in the work for peace. And here, of course, I'm thinking of the focus we have in the Folke Bernadotte Academy and the focus the Swedish government has on women. And talking on behalf of the Folke Bernadotte Academy, I can really tell you that we are proud, I am proud, that we have been commissioned to establish the first ever Swedish Women Mediation Network. And personally, I think eventually here is the time when we have to go from words to deeds in order to ensure women's meaningful but also influential participation in different types of dialogue processes as mediators and part of mediation teams. I said earlier that Folke Bernadotte was the first ever UN mediator. And it can also be interesting to notice that that title, that term, has never been used after Folke Bernadotte was mediator. For sure, the UN today, they have many, many mediators, but this exact title has never ever been used since Folke Bernadotte got it in the end of the 40s. But he was the first UN mediator, and besides Folke Bernadotte, we all know that Sweden also have a long and deep commitment to peace mediation. So we at the Folke Bernadotte Academy, we think it is very logical that we today, here, when we are commemorating Folke Bernadotte, also have decided this afternoon together to focus on mediation and the possible role of Sweden in different missions in the future. So by those words, once again, feel very, very welcome to this commemoration event and the seminar this afternoon with the precise title, Mediation for Peace, Challenges, Opportunities, and the Role of Sweden. Thank you very much. And on my right-hand side now, I have my colleague Marcus Derblom, who is the head of our department responsible for prevention, peace building, and governance. And Marcus, he is going to moderate the seminar this afternoon and also going to introduce our distinguished speakers. Our plan from the beginning was that another new colleague at the Folke Bernadotte Academy, Chris Coulter, should moderate this seminar this afternoon. But unfortunately, she has lost her voice and she is at home. But Marcus, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, as a late addition to the program, I'm humble, but I'm hopefully going to provide you with a conversation this afternoon. I'm the director for Prevention, Peace Building and Governance at the Folke Bernadotte Academy, FBA. Today, once again, commemorating the UN's first mediator, we're going to have a conversation about mediation as a tool for peace. In addition, we will try to shape the discussion to also be about Sweden and our own historical role in mediation, and perhaps even more important, the future prospects for playing a role in mediation efforts. And of course, giving its primary or primacy role in the Swedish foreign policy, we're also going to try to focus a little bit more on women's meaningful participation in peace processes. Now, I want to emphasize that my role is specifically that of the moderator. If this afternoon would hinge upon my knowledge about these matters, it will be a short order. So therefore, I'm very glad that I have such a knowledgeable set of guests that will help me conducting this conversation, sharing their thoughts and experiences with us all. I'm going to invite all these people up to the stage one by one, thereby gradually increasing the level of expertise and also gradually immersing you in knowledge about peace mediation. We're going to have a chat one by one, but also as a group. And then in about half an hour or so, we're also very much honored to have the State Secretary for Development Cooperation, Her Excellency Ulrika Moder, to come here and give us a keynote speech on the current ambitions of the Swedish government when it comes to peace mediation and peace diplomacy. I think that is going to be very interesting. After that, we will return to our guests on stage to ask them about what they've heard in this keynote speech, but also to provide some reflections on the potential future roles of Sweden in peace mediation. After that, then, I'm going to ask the Director General to once again enter the stage to provide a few closing remarks, and then you're off, basically. So, all right. I'm going to start now by inviting up our first guest. He is a highly accomplished academic. He has published more than 10 books around his subject areas of expertise, which are international mediation in civil wars, religion and conflict, and also the strategic dynamics of nonviolent conflicts. He is also very published in many of the most prominent academic journals within political science, international relations, and peace and conflict research. He's currently a professor, perhaps not the professor, but a professor at the department the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University. So please join me in welcoming Professor Isak Svensson to the stage. Right, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
First, maybe to provide some focus to the discussion, I would like to shamelessly ask you to put this crew into the classroom again and ask you a simple question. What is mediation? And what do we mean by international mediation?
Well, it depends a little bit on who you ask, but if you ask me as a scholar, I would say that mediation is basically someone that is external to a conflict, that enters into a conflict with the aim of trying to mitigate or resolve the conflict, trying to help the parties to reach towards some type of settlement in the conflict, but that do not use the law, the tools of the laws, arbitration, and doesn't use the application of force. So it's a type of third party that goes beyond the use of force. It's a diplomatic type of intervention, and something that goes beyond the use of that uses but is not arbitration. If you ask the United Nations who is a mediator, they would also have criteria such as impartiality. So that would be an important aspect, and that is for practitioners sometimes an important criterion. But that is actually one of the debated issues in mediation research. Is biased or unbiased mediators more effective? So we have a wider take on it, I would say.
All right. So no force, no arbitrary role. It's an external part engaging in mediation and trying to resolve the conflicts. If we take that up to the contemporary landscape we have today of conflicts, but mediation efforts and peace efforts, could you talk to us a little bit about the current trend or the current situations where we see this field of going?
Well, one way to look at the trends when it comes to mediation is to distinguish between the sort of the offers of mediation, the supply of mediators, and the demand for mediators. So the supply is the third-party perspective, if you wish. And here we have seen a great development over time. So the last decades, more and more mediators are willing to serve as mediators. It has been, as Sven-Erik Söder said, more of a profession, so more of a development into professionalization of international mediation. More training for mediators, more research on mediation, all kinds of development in the direction of sort of making mediation at a higher quality. So we see an increase in institutional capacity for mediation, and that can actually be measured. You can see in the number of mediation support units and networks and organizations that engage in mediation are increasing over time. But at the same time, the number of mediated conflicts are not increasing. So we are not seeing more and more conflicts being mediated. And this, of course, is puzzling. So something with the demand for mediation is missing.
What do you think that is?
Yes, so we don't really know what that could be, how that could be explained, but there are of course possible sort of propositions. One could be that all mediators run for the same ball. We have seen a clustering of mediation. For instance, during the the time of the Balkans, there was a lot of mediators going into Balkans to mediate. So there could be a sort of a clustering of mediators, everyone goes to the same place. It could also be that the type of conflicts are changing over time. And here we can see important shifts. In my research, I focus on religion and conflict, and there we can see a quite dramatic shift in religiously defined conflicts. So 9 out of 11 wars in 2015 were religiously defined, partly religiously defined. That's over 80% of all the civil wars were religiously defined. Whereas only a minority of all the wars in the 70s were defined in terms of religion. So that is an important thing. Then, of course, it is a question, from research, we know that demand for mediation depends on that those that make decisions about conflict sort of feel the cost of conflict. So cost of conflict is an important factor for opening up for mediation. First, when parties feel that the conflict costs too much, then they are ready to go to the negotiation table. So of course, there are two sort of implications of that would be that either we see to it that those that make decisions of war and peace actually feel the cost of conflict, or we make sure that those that feel the cost are brought into the decision making. So both of these are strategies that you can think about. But I think the overall trend is sort of an increase in the supply of mediation, but at the same time, this has not translated into actual demand for mediation. So that is...
Conceptually, this sounds almost like a marketplace for mediation.
Yes, and I mean, you can use market terminology here, but I mean, without any, it's not a market in that sense. But there is two levels of analysis from which you can analyze this.
Okay, so an increased supply of mediators and mediation efforts. Are there other trends? I'm thinking, listening to people talking about mediation, the image it invokes is, the high-level negotiator or high-level mediator who's the front face of state-to-state talks. But mediation takes place at several levels, doesn't it? I mean, the landscape is much more pluralistic, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's true, and it's occur at several different levels, and there are more actors involved in this kinds of activity. And I think that talks to the question that I had, the comment that I had previously, that we see an increased level of professionalization, more actors being involved at different levels.
Do you think it's also a result of contemporary conflicts being very complex? There are many issues, so there are legitimate demands from more people to actually be part of peace efforts and whatever comes after war. Do you think this drives also the number of actors being involved?
Yes, I think that could have to do with it. I mean, complex. I don't think the number of issues necessarily are increasing, but we see that the number of actors are increasing. So, rebel groups are fractionalizing. In Uppsala conflict database, we have sort of, when we look at the Syria, we talk about over 1,000 rebel groups or factions that are in there. So. Extremely complex, highly complex in terms of the rebel fragmentization. and also in terms of external intervention. So that has been a major shift. So we have two basic types of conflict, right? Between states, interstate, and within state, intrastate. But the big change that happened the last year is that the middle category, which we called internationalized intrastate conflicts, are increasing a lot. So we see last year, 2015, 40% of all conflicts were internationalized interstate conflicts. So, and that was the largest amount since the end of the end of the Second World War. So it's quite dramatic shift over time, actually. And this, of course, makes it extremely complicated. You have a fragmented rebel movement. You have a lot of external actors involved in the internal armed conflicts.
But against this background, with this complicated background and this new landscape, pluralistic landscape of actors and interests, I have to ask you, does mediation work? Is it worth it?
Sort of success in mediation is extremely difficult to get at, because it depends on what do you mean with success? What kind of criteria should we set for success? Is mediation the most important factor? Most would agree that mediation has a positive effect in many circumstances, but that is not the determining factor, that there are other structural factors that can lie behind shifts towards peace. We know from systematic empirical studies that mediation if mediators enters, it's a higher likelihood of peace settlements. But there's been relatively little work looking at the long-term effects of mediation. So, and some have focusing on interstate conflicts, showing that there is potential risk of higher likelihood of crisis in the future. So they're a kind of different results when they come to the research frontier on this. So I think you need to have a sort of a relatively open definition of success, and be aware of that it's extremely difficult to measure.
Okay. I'm going to slightly shift the subject now, because I know that you are about to publish a book centering on the small states of the North, the Nordic countries, and their experiences in mediation. I think there's an image that we are good mediators and that we have an ingrained peace tradition. Is that more of a self-image, or is it true? Do we have the prerequisites? What do you elaborate on in your book?
I think we have a very important history in Sweden, but not only in Sweden, I would say in the Nordic countries. We have a very important history of peacemaking. We have in a forthcoming book, and now I will do a little bit of commercial.
Sure, go ahead.
This is the Fredens Diplomater, the Diplomats of Peace. Nordic mediation from Bernadotte to Artisarius. Professor Peter Wallenstein and myself have written, and it's coming out in 2 weeks. And it's looking at the Nordic experience of mediation. And Kai Eidou sitting over here, and Pierre Chourie, who I saw before, and Birgitta Holstadani is part of this. Some of the experiences that we explore in this book. And overall, there's been over 40 countries in which 40 conflicts in which Nordic mediators have intervened. And we're talking about over 50 mediators, all the way from Count Bernadotte and up to today. So it's an important tradition that we have in the Nordic countries.
Mm-hmm. Would you say Sweden has a comparative advantage over the other Nordics? Are there differences in approaches, or are there similarities, and are there links to potential outcomes of mediation efforts?
I would say overall the similarities are bigger than the differences. I mean, we have especially talking about Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and all of them have a relatively similar approach, I would say. There are some differences on the margins. Norway has been the country most active during the last decades. Traditionally, I would say Sweden were more active during the Cold War, but they have shifted, especially with the breaking point being the Oslo Accord. After that, Norway has been the prime mover when it comes to peace mediation. And Norway have succeeded in some ways that I think is important to point out. I think two things that actually differs between the Norwegian approach to it from the Swedish, and that would be the concentration of resources. Sweden had a lot of resources, but Norway have a concentration of resources to it, and also the sort of the ability to go beyond the party politics. Because in Sweden it has been a risk that the mediation, international mediation, had been sort of linked to party politics. It has not transcended the party politics as in Norway. So that is, I think, and that, I think, is a comparative advantage of Norway, that they have been able to do this.
Returning now to the issue of the many mediators and the complex landscape. Success is difficult to measure, but can you see effective mediation taking place at other levels than, you know, the specific high-level ones, sort of the track 3s and track 2s of diplomacy? Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's not a particular focus of my research. I don't have much to say about that, but I think that it is an important avenue. And in many ways, what you can see is that track 2 mediation opens up, of course, for more official mediation. So that is an important contribution of track 2 mediation, of course.
Okay. Please remain seated, but you can scoop over there for a little while. And it's time now for me to welcome our next guest. Like Isak Svensson, she is an academic. She has a PhD in cultural geography from York University and also a master's in environmental studies. However, most of her professional life has been spent actually doing conflict prevention in the field. Working for civil society and non-governmental organizations such as Safer World, Mercy Corps, Pact Sudan, also Emmanuel International, I think. And she's been quite focused so recently on the Horn of Africa and the complex dynamics there. But now, currently, she's the executive director of the Life and Peace Institute, which has its seat here in Sweden, its main office. But it's an organization, an international and ecumenical organization that has more than 3 decades worth of peace efforts behind them. So it's a real honor now to welcome Dr. Judy McCallum from Life and Peace Institute. All right, you've been listening in on the discussion here with Professor Svensson, of course. I think it's particularly interesting to hook on to this concept of the pluralistic landscape of mediators. And I'm thinking specifically of the role of organizations such as the ones you've been working for. And maybe a particular interest in faith-based organizations, actually. If so many wars are about religious dimension, there might be a link here. Could you talk a little bit to us about the role of faith-based organizations in these kinds of settings?
Yeah, I think faith-based organizations play a very important role, particularly not only in conflicts that have a religious basis, but also other conflicts. And if you see a lot of the key, even mediators, and both at track 1 and track 2, and even down to track 3, people-to-people processes have been often brokered by religious leaders. I think the unique thing about religious institutions is they have a network into communities. That other NGOs even, or civil society does not have that network. They have an audience with the local communities. They should have a good understanding of what's going on in the communities. And they have a regular, whether it's a mosque or a church, regular audience with local communities. So bringing some of those issues up to the mediation process is a critical role that they can play. And tapping into that. They do have challenges, of course. They often will represent a very specific, not the whole society, but a specific part of society. Sometimes they can come from quite conservative perspectives, and when you talk about women involvement, they might have very specific ideas of women's involvement. I remember talking to a imam in Somalia who was very much in support of NGO and civil society engagement in peace processes, but he really didn't want to see women so much involved. And so that's one of the challenges that we face working with faith-based organizations. But I think they also bring a moral authority to the table, and they can influence leaders in ways that other civil society may not be able to, particularly if those leaders come from their faith community. I've seen that quite a bit in South Sudan, for example. The Bishop Taban Paride has been able to intervene in conflicts on a number of levels because of he's seen as neutral, and he's someone who's well respected by the different parties. So an individual such as that, who represents a bit of a moral authority, also has that ability to negotiate and to influence.
Yeah. Broadening it a little bit then to more general civil society or grassroots organizations working from that perspective, you get the sense that sometimes it's very hard to provide or get that linkage between sort of the high level, the big mediators, the big shot mediators, and the actual work done and tediously and relentlessly done over the years in the field in conflict areas. Do you find that this is the truth? Is it your experience as well?
Very much so, and I'd say it's getting even harder as time goes on. In the context where we work, the space for civil society is getting very narrow. Civil society organizations are, in some contexts, the political elite do not want civil society organizations at the table. They are threatened by them. And so you see both, even when there isn't conflict, the space for civil society is narrowing, and when conflict comes, it is narrowing even more. Recently, South Sudan, there was an issue with civil society leaders who had talked to some of the international community about peace now are being targeted. This is happening in a lot of other contexts. So the space for civil society is shrinking, and I think that's having an influence. Getting to the table is very difficult as well, because the different parties do not necessarily want civil society there, don't see the need for civil society to be there, and so they will try and block it. So it's really important that the international community and others push for them, because civil society brings the voices of the communities and the marginalized to the table, not just the two parties who are at conflict. So it's very important. But one of the things that I have also noticed is people have an interesting concept of civil society. They think there's one unified civil society that speaks with one voice, and that's another challenge. Is a lot of civil society, they have different voices, they have different constituencies, and so bringing them together in networks so that they can agree on positions to present. What happens often is if the two parties are pushed to include civil society, they will cherry pick those who best represent their positions, and will speak, so that who they can influence, and you won't necessarily get the wider perspective. So understanding who civil society is as well is very important.
Is there research on this, on the role of civil society in mediation?
Yes, that's a big research field, and it's not my particular expertise, but I could say that overall there is quite a solid research finding that if you include civil society actors in the peace settlement, and if you manage to be able to get them to the table so they are part of the peace deal in some way, then that increases the likelihood that you will have a durable peace. Work by my colleague Desiree Nilsson, for instance, has shown this in a large number of cases. So, and there's a set of studies also showing the exact link, how participation by civil society increases the likelihood of long-term peace. I think that's an important finding.
Dr. McCallum, women are often excluded from not only negotiations, but also mediation, but also decision-making and peace-building processes. Things that will most definitely affect their future, or the future of anyone living in that country, specific country or context. I mean, besides this all being wrong, what are the actual consequences we see from excluding women from these kinds of processes? What do you meet in the field in terms of peace or sustainability?
I think of course, you miss sort of half of the society's perspective. Women, not always, but often are the ones who are most interested in a peaceful settlement and reconciliation. They are often intermarried across conflicting communities, and so they bring a unique perspective. They don't like to see their sons and their husbands being killed. They are left with the burden economically, socially, when fighting is ongoing. So a prolonged conflict has a real actual impact on their lives in many ways. So not including them, you miss out on half of the world, sort of, or those who are involved. And I think they can. Earlier we were talking about the importance of thinking out of the box. Women think out of the box sometimes and can think of solutions for conflicts that surprise everyone if their voices are allowed to be heard instead of the usual sort of track. They can bring different solutions. They come from these networks and relational sort of approach. So I think not having that voice and the impact that it's having on their real lives is one of the key issues.
How do organizations such as the ones that you've been working for, and how are you actively involving women in your kind of work?
It's actually not very easy, particularly in the context where we work. Women have a lot of barriers to participation in general in any kind of leadership. It's important to note that women are involved in peace building, even in spite of the barriers that they have. So they are there, they're influencing in ways that we can't see. So one of the things we've been trying to do in Somalia and also in some of the work I've done in South Sudan is to look at actual ways that women are already influencing peace processes, and through their roles as wives and mothers and even sisters, they do have a role. There are very key women who behind the scenes are influencing. So it's important to understand that women are involved. They are also involved in the conflict. They are the ones providing food to soldiers. In interethnic conflicts, they're the ones hiding the weapons. So they are very much involved both on the conflict side as well as on the peace side, but not necessarily in visible ways. So we're trying to make some of that more visible, but we're also trying to open up the space for them to be more involved in peace processes. So in Somalia, we're starting a new program where we're looking at working with women's groups and trying to get around the challenges specifically that women face. So having all women come together and discuss the issues, then have them presented to the other peace talks is an important aspect, because women may not be allowed to travel very far without a male representative from the family. They may not be allowed to speak. So you have to come up with other ways to get their voices heard and also start to break through and make it more normal for women to be able to participate more formally in the processes.
Innovation once again.
Yes.
That's it. Okay. Please also remain seated. Perhaps if I could ask you to move over. I'm going to welcome our third guest up. She is one of Sweden's most skilled and experienced diplomats. And she's been working over 40 years. Many of those years she's spent with the Middle East, specifically Iraq and Syria. But in her years of foreign service, she's dealt with a wide range of issues such as post-conflict reconstruction and development, disarmament and non-proliferation issues. She's also served as the Deputy Director for CIPRI for a number of years, and in addition, as head of the Swedish Institute in Alexandria. Now, I'm also proud to introduce her as one of the original 9 members of the network of women mediators that the government has asked the FBA to coordinate and facilitate. I was almost trying to coin founding mothers, but I think that might not really work in this kind of setting. But since there are founding fathers, there might be founding mothers. She's also participated in a number of discussions on a concept called engendering constitution making. I'm going to ask her to talk about that and a lot of other things in just a short while. So please welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador Birgitta Holstalani. Yes, Ambassador, though your diplomatic background is so much more, in the last couple of years you've been an advisor to the UN Special Envoy to Syria. And I would like to start there and ask you, what has been your role in that team?
Well, originally the task was for me to head a working group with the responsibility to see to the continuation of the state institutions and the public services. And then after that, the reconstruction and development of Syria. So it was a huge basket, you would say. We were four of us as advisors to Staffan de Mistura. One German colleague was the one who should take care of military issues, terrorism, security issues. Another one should take care of legal issues and the new constitution. And a third one, Jan Egeland, who is known very well in Sweden, who is responsible for the humanitarian issues. So we were four of us called to join Staffan de Mistura and his team. However, those groups never materialized. Rather, we have been asked to be present at all meetings, the four of us together. And these talks, I call them talks rather than mediation, because, first of all, they are proximity talks. The parties don't see each other. The parties don't sit in the same room with each other. So the Staffan de Mistura team or delegation sees, for example, the delegation of the government in the morning, of the opposition in the afternoon, and other groups like the civil society or the women, I will come back to them also, in the evening. So that is the way the talks are ongoing. So
do you think this is unique for Syria, or the complexity there, or is it just a fact of life in today's conflict and mediation?
I think it is rather unique for Syria. Syria is the situation in Syria is so complex. Somebody said 1,000 groups. I mean, they are not all represented in Geneva, but there are, people have counted 18 different governments or groups that are now facing these negotiations and being part of them. Of course, we know that Russia and the United States of America are the ones with the keys in their hands very much. The United Nations mediators or mediating team is, of course, facilitating the intra-Syrian talks, because this is now the first time that they are only Syrians. Before, during the previous envoys, before Staffan de Mistura, we had Kofi Annan in 2012, we had then Lakhdar Brahimi, 2012 to 2014, and during that time there were meetings, but with no Syrians often. So this is now the time has come for the intra-Syrian talks with only Syria, which is of course a positive thing in the eyes of the Syrians themselves. But nevertheless, it's very, very complex.
I see.
And there are so many to be represented.
So there's yet again a ceasefire in place, or however fragile. There are stalled talks all along the way. Do you think that where we are now, is this another opportunity for a supply of mediation? Do we have the chance now, or?
Yes, as the Director General mentioned, Folke Bernadotte, when he talked about mediation, the chances of success, 1 in 100, I believe you said. So I don't know the degree of, or the percentage of chances to success in this case, but if you are not, I think, if you were not born optimist, you couldn't work with this at all. So one has to have faith, faith somehow in the process. And now with the last days' developments with Russia and United States agreement, which is of course extremely important. And I remember Staffan de Mistura used to say months ago, if we don't see any agreement before September, the end of September, the case is lost. So we are very happy that this agreement now came about. And what it means is that, well, after 48 hours, we have stated, or they have stated, that yes, so few people, no civilians have been killed. So one has to call it a relative success. It doesn't mean that there are not skirmishes, and some soldiers have been killed, some rebels have been killed, but no civilians. And the civilians, of course, as everybody knows, have been the great losers in the Syrian war.
The ones feeling the cost of war, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Not least the women.
Yeah. You've listened to Dr. Judy McCallum here in our discussion about the role of women in peace processes and mediation. Can you tell us a little bit more on how women are included in the Syrian peace talks? And if and how this has made a difference in the run-up to now?
Yes, well, as a woman, it feels very good to see the women, the Syrian women, being very active. Staffan de Mistura has engaged women. Women's Advisory Board, WAB as it's abbreviated, consisting of 12 women, Syrian women, from all strata of society, with hijab, without hijab, conservative, liberal, atheists, leftists, all kinds of women are represented there really. And they are quite active, and this is the first time in any peace process that a formalized group of women are representing their cause in a peace process. So these women, they endeavor to come up with documents that concern the peace process. That is, for example, they have views on a new constitution, on the transition to a new Syria, and so on. So they are not only concerned with purely women's issues, but rather the future of Syria in general. So they are quite active. Besides that group, Women's Advisory Board, there is also a very active group of women, Syrian women, behind the opposition delegation. The delegation of the opposition is about 15 people, maybe 3 women in that delegation. The same goes for the regime, also 3 women in that delegation. But this group of women, which is behind, we don't see them, they meet in the hotel usually, where they are staying. They are pressing the men in the opposition delegation. So they have succeeded, for example, in pressing the men to accept 30% of representation of women in the forthcoming constitutional text on the parliament, for example. And so they are having intense discussions, and they try to press the male part of the opposition negotiating team.
It's interesting. Maybe Professor Svensson, I mean, going back to research, is this an area of interest in research, women's links to peace processes? Are there findings that can support, the links between increased participation of women and the actual outcome of peace efforts?
It's absolutely a big research area that is growing a lot, and there's a lot of research on the research frontier, so to say, that is being done right now. And I know of several studies that are examining this relationship. So there is a lot of work being done on this. There's been a discussion that in the UN, some of the UN documents about the exact findings, but that's a minor thing, I would say. I mean, we are not there yet that we have established exact causation, but the research is moving towards that direction.
Okay, Ambassador, let me get back to the concept that kind of caught my interest, engendering constitution making, something that you're working on. Please tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, in a peace process that the Syrian is now going forward, hopefully, there is a room or a window of opportunity being opened, and that is to have a constitution for the new Syria, so to say, after the conflict is over. We hope to see a transition into another Syria with other laws, with other rules, and other possibilities for the civil society and so on. Now, the constitution, some people say it's now or never. It's the time now to really get into the constitution which is now being written. Issues that concern the women. Later on, it might be too late. So let's now engender the constitution, put the gender issues into the constitution. So every text, every article that is being discussed or being redrafted, it is important to mention not only men, but also women. In every sentence, more or less, where men are mentioned, women must be mentioned, just to remind everybody. And then, of course, there are specific issues that are important for women and in their wish to engender the constitution. And that is what will be later on new family legislation, civil laws, that are now, for instance, hindering women to have the same inheritance rules as for the men, and other issues that concern women, that they feel that the constitution, which is the basis, after all, the framework for a new legislation afterwards, this already here, we must get in the issues that concern the women. Otherwise, as I said, it might be too late.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
It's now time for me to introduce the State Secretary for Development Cooperation in the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Her Excellency Ulrika Moder. Welcome.
It looked so comfortable Friday afternoon, sitting there discussing, and
I will ask you to join us after your speech.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this possibility, and I would have liked to listen more to you, but I understand that we will have some time at least for a conversation later on. We all can see that we live in a world and times of great unrest, and a world which is unfortunately characterized since the past decades by more conflicts, but also terror and extremism, and where the humanitarian needs seem infinite, and where we're witnessing the largest number of refugees that we have seen since the Second World War. But then these challenges, as all challenges, they need to be changed into solutions, and we need to see the opportunities, even though we witness quite some new challenges these days. We have more than 130 million people that are in need of humanitarian aid. This is equivalent to the world's 11th most populous nation if these people would have lived in one country. More than $25 billion is spent on humanitarian assistance, and while this amount is 12 times greater than 15 years ago, think about this, 12 times greater than 15 years ago, we only cover about 50% of the humanitarian needs. But then talking about solutions, at the same time as we have all these challenges surrounding us, like dark clouds, we also can see that the political leadership worldwide actually understand and has taken into account science and the need for a new agenda for sustainable development. And the Agenda 2030 that was taken last year is actually quite a bold agenda, bringing for the first time the solutions that I know that many of all of you in this room know that we need to see coming together. And that is the three aspects of sustainability. The knowledge that we will not have economic sustainability if we don't take into account social justice, and we will not have economic or social sustainability if we don't respect the borders of our planet and the importance of having environment and climate into the development agenda. Although many humanitarian appeals remain unanswered, the solution to the challenges that we see are not humanitarian aid. They are about political solutions, and they are about long-term sustainable development. And I think you know all of these aspects that I will mention. First, and this we stress every time we discuss, we need to address the root causes fueling the conflicts that we see. And we believe that with the experience and the very good and quite ambitious development cooperation that Sweden has, combined with the possibility now to be part of the Security Council, we can actually step up and improve even more the Swedish contribution to the peace-building agenda. Approximately 1.4 billion people and increasing share of the world's extremely poor live in conflict-affected and fragile states. And those who are the poorest, the number of them will grow in these areas, in the conflict and ridden and also fragile states. Therefore, we need to focus within our political efforts, but also within our development cooperation in these areas. And I will get back to that and how we work with this within our development cooperation. Second, and this I know that you have been discussing here, we need to make good use of not only half of the population, but the full population and its potential of women and girls, but also taking into account not only the Security Resolution 1325, but also 2250, bringing young people into the agenda of solutions. It has been 16 years since the Security Resolution 1325 was adopted. I know that many of you here have been working hard to bring a Swedish contribution and to see to that we can make it happen. But we need more partners in this, and we need more effort. Third, we need then to make the peace processes conclusive, inclusive, talking about gender and young people's participation, and also sustainable, bringing in the long-term solutions with also long-term development cooperation and political support. And the Minister for Development Cooperation, Isabella Lövin, she has engaged in this since we started in government 2 years back. This was when we saw that our development cooperation needed to improve with regard to conflicts and conflict sensitivity, and we gave an instruction to the authority SIDA to work much more on this. And Isabella Lövin also engaged in the international dialogue for peace and state building. And it is a dialogue among conflict-affected and fragile states, but also among donors to see how we can learn from experiences and how we can improve our cooperation, both South-South, but then also as donors. We have a situation now where donors don't cooperate, don't take into account the local agenda, but go very much into projects and programs instead of really looking at the core aspects of what needs to be done in one country, one plan with regard to political aspects on peace building and also development and development cooperation. So we need a new international partnership where we take all these aspects into account, and the international dialogue is one of the instruments that we have used since we started. We had a big meeting back-to-back to the CIPRI meeting in Stockholm last year, where we had a good representation also from the UN community, where we also stated that we need to shift from this more short-term planning into a more long-term approach and solution, and look at the security agenda together with the development agenda and also the humanitarian support. You all know here that the successful peace is not only a matter of reaching ceasefire, but also a matter of having justice, education, health, reconciliation, and of course then fair distribution of resources. I think these days when we can celebrate the peace accord in Colombia, we all understand that have followed the process that we will need a lot of justice to be able to have peace that lasts in Colombia. The Swedish government, together with Folke Bernadotte Academy, has launched this network of peace mediators, and we have one of you here today, focusing on ensuring women's effective participation in peace processes. And the aim is to increase our efforts actively and to bring and to develop experiences and to be part of also different international projects that work with regard to this aspect. The network, and maybe you have already talked about this now, but then I will repeat, but maybe repetition is also good to remember, has 9 members. They are all senior diplomats with a wide range of experiences from different conflict situations and also from international and regional organizations. They are individual members of the network, and they are ready to serve as special envoys to a particular crisis or conflict situation when needed. And they will also be able then to gather and to increase the knowledge of the importance of women's participation in international peace processes and dialogue. They work on behalf of the Swedish government, and they have one essential aim, and that is to promote the participation of women in conflict resolution, in prevention and peace-building efforts. But it's actually not to show off that we have Swedish female mediators that we want to do this project. It's with a firm belief that these mediators also know and understand the importance of local engagement and all the capacity that we can find there among local women in the peace-building process. So it's much broader than showing off with good capacity from Sweden. Sometimes we hear that there are no women or competent women even available to handle these processes. And we know that this is not true, and we want to prove that such sweeping and ignorant statements really belong to the past. The network will work closely with the Swedish embassies, and they will work also mostly in the conflict situations where we have representation. This is because we want to make good use of all the contacts that we have through the embassies, but also through our broad development cooperation. They are also, the setup is also designed to be flexible and to provide also support when needed to other headships such as the UN or EU or OSCE or the African Union or other relevant international organizations. We're in a startup phase, and this is actually one of some projects that you will see that will come along and that we will present in quite short time, where we hope that you can see that we strengthen the peace-building effort within the Swedish government, but also then taking the political aspect, working together with the development cooperation in a very good way. And we very much look forward to follow this project. We know that we have a lot of experience to build on. We know that there are a lot of things happening there, and we believe that Sweden really can be part of this and make a very important contribution, both with the work that we have with our authorities, Folke Bernadotte, of course, but also with SIDA and other actors within Swedish Development Cooperation, civil society organizations, and so on. We have such a broad network of actors. And we think that when we look at this and see how we can improve even more, we will actually contribute much more to the peace-building efforts that are so needed in this world of today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of good points there. I'm picking up the focus on fragile context or conflict-ridden contexts, making good use of all the population, including the young, making sure that the peace processes are conclusive and inclusive, and also to work on a more long-term view in whatever we make efforts in both terms of foreign policy but also development cooperation at large. And also, I think a good presentation of the Women Network that we've just launched. I'm now going to ask our guests here to reflect a bit on the State Secretary's speech, and I'm going to start by asking you, Ambassador, because I mean you are a diplomat of many, many years, and the things you hear here, is it wow, finally, or is it I've heard it before?
No, I think it is refreshing to listen, and I like the issue not only about the women but also about the youth. And looking to this audience here, I am very happy to see very few white-headed people, really, and that's the future. And this is also what we need in the peace work. It's really, I mean, I'm myself one of those, so I mean, but it's important. When I was head of the Swedish Institute for Dialogue in Alexandria for a few years, 2010 to 2014, I saw the importance of the views of the youth. After the Arab Spring, or when the Arab Spring came about in the beginning of 2011, it was the youth really who came to the fore and were the real force. And by the way, I'm sure they will come back. They are not keeping silent. The issue of the youth is very, very important to use them. Now, the women's participation is, of course, extremely important. And the resolution 1325 is now spreading in my part of the world, the Middle East. National plans are now being done. The first country was Iraq, recently, or a year ago rather, who for one of the few occasions where the Kurdish government and the Baghdadi government came together to launch together, write together, the ministries, a action plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325. So this is also a role that the women are playing. I think it's very good. The next country was Palestine. Otherwise, there's nobody yet who has presented an action plan. So the 1325 and the role of women are really very important. But that said, the 1325, the implementation of that resolution will take years, of course. And I think that the ministries, the implementation bodies are going to need help. And maybe help from those who have more experience than those countries in the Middle East. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so a special focus on youth.
That was, I think is important.
Yeah. Professor Svensson, any thoughts? Will measures such as these strengthen Sweden's position in the world and make us better suited to engage in conflict resolution, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think it was a very interesting speech by the State Secretary, and two things that I wanted to comment on. The first one is, of course, the role of women, which I think is a very important one and has been up here. I mean, it's no coincidence, I think, that the two peace agreements that we have had the last years have occurred in processes that we have had a lot of women inclusion. I'm thinking about Philippines and then Colombia, that was already mentioned. These are the two successes that we can sort of observe the last years, and in both of these, women have been active in the peace process, either as mediators or as negotiators, or finding ways to include them in the process in some way. So I think that's a very important role, and thank you for pointing that out. The second point I want to raise is your startup of your whole speech and the worrying times that we are living in. And I agree with you that we are living in a time of more conflicts. We have the last coding from the Uppsala Conflict Database, UCDP, talks about 50 conflicts in 2015. And that's a record high in the number of conflicts. At the same time, we see a slight decrease in the number of people killed at the battlefield, which is a positive sign. And I think it's important not to be too pessimistic, because when I come out as a peace and conflict researcher and talk to people, the mood is very pessimistic, that people we live in such an extremely troubled time. And we do, yes we do, but we have to take it a little bit into perspective. I mean, if we look at the battle trends over time, we are actually living in a relatively peaceful time if we compare to historical times. So just think about the wars in Korea, or the Indo-China wars that are much higher in terms of number of people killed and affected. So I think that's important to take that into account as well. Not to be, and I think your emphasis on I think the comments also on the optimism, the need for optimism, is an important one to bear in mind here.
Dr. McCallum, coming from the civil society grassroots level, was there enough focus on that level, do you think? Or would you have wanted more?
Of course, we will always want more focus on civil society, but what I really liked actually is the focus on the long term. And this is one of the things that I'm always saying, peace building is a very, very long-term process. And particularly in contexts where there's been protracted conflict for decades, even in some cases. Too quickly we want to move from the peace settlement into development, into just moving on and ignoring what's happened. When I worked in South Sudan, I worked with, originally it was the Peace and Reconciliation Committee of the SPLM. As soon as the peace agreement was signed, it became the Peace Commission. And I said, where's reconciliation gone? And I was told, now is not the time for reconciliation. And we see what happened. There was zero interest in reconciliation during that period from 2005 until war broke out again. And I think what we see in South Sudan is because there was no appetite for looking at some of the long-term peace building and reconciliation aspects. There was a real rush into let's do development. And these things will come at another time. So I think taking the long-term view is so critical. These communities have gone through trauma, incredible trauma we can't even imagine. Physical trauma themselves, loss of family, displacement. Those things take even generations to address. And too often our focus is very short-term, a 2-year, 1 year. In South Sudan it was a 1-year programs after program to do peace building, and we kept saying we need that long-term vision. We need that long-term planning to guide communities out of the trauma that they've gone through. So I really do want to say, let's keep that long-term vision there.
Excellent. I'm going to first, because I have been terribly omissive here, and ask you, do you want to ask each other any questions while you are on the panel? Otherwise, I will open up the floor for a few questions from the audience, I think.
Sometimes I think about track 1, track 2, track 3, and so on. What's the role of the different tracks? Now, everybody knows the track 1. This is the formal negotiating. And track 2, track 3, maybe even more, I think can make a great impact on track 1. But sometimes I feel that track 1 doesn't listen to track 2 and track 3. And I don't know what you say, your experience, because track 2 and track 3, I think, have all the civil society views. They have the views that maybe don't come to the fore on the negotiating table on track 1. Track 1.
No, I think that's very true, and I think it's because the parties who are at the track 1 level don't necessarily want other voices there. They're the ones who've been fighting with each other. They don't necessarily want to dilute it, and in a lot of cases that's the argument. We need to focus on the political settlement and not, and those things can come later. Often is what you will hear. We will, once we come to an agreement, then we'll look at these other issues rather than bringing the issues that are emerging from communities to the table in the actual negotiations. So I think that's a challenge we need to keep pushing to open up the track one for more civil society participation, and the issues that are emerging from the people-to-people processes, which track 3 to track 2, the more civil society engagement, and then because those are the issues really affecting people. It's their lives that are impacted, and that those don't always get translated into the peace agreements.
All right, thank you. Let's open up then for any questions from the floor. I see Ambassador Olje Lund. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Do I need a loudspeaker?
Yeah, maybe we could.
I have an observation on mediation in general, and it comes from Darfur, where I participated in the team at one time. The mediator, Darfur was a conflict between the government of Sudan and the province of Darfur. The parties to the conflict was the government of Sudan and Darfur. The mediator was African Union, which is a good thing in a way because it's regional. African Union at the same time is a governmental organization in which the government of Sudan is a member. So one of our conclusions from that mediation is that the mediator unintentionally tended to favor the government side. Especially in the African context, nobody would encourage rebellion or freedom movements. And secondly, there was a team of observers to which I belonged. International observers from the European Union, from the United Nations and others. And they were there to put pressure on the parties to reach an agreement. But the international community at that time, they were fed up with the fighting. They wanted end of the fighting, they wanted end of the sufferings of the people, they wanted a ceasefire. So this was the message from the international community through the observers, end the fighting. It was not the message that Ulrika talked about, see to a long-term solution in Darfur. So the whole setup of mediation, in my opinion, I'm exaggerating maybe, in my opinion, favored one side and not the other. Because pressure on parties in that situation meant pressure on the rebellion side. The government at all the time. This is not a question, an observation, mainly maybe to Professor Isaac and the others.
Yeah, I mean, there's research on this, isn't it? One side favoring all, being the neutral arbiter, or being on the one side or the other.
Yes, there is research on this, and there is an academic debate, and on that academic debate I have a position. So I've written a book on biased mediation, showing that biased mediation is actually more, in general and across many cases, more effective than neutral mediator. But there are many other arguments against my position, so now I'm a little bit biased when I talk about this. But the one important finding here is that government-biased mediators in general, if we talk about many cases, are generally more effective than neutral mediators. So this is a little bit in response to your thing, but your comment. But I would like to stress that when we talk about government-biased mediators, we mean the ties between the parties that they have had before. We're not talking about the bias that occur throughout the process, which you point out. And I think that's an important distinction. Even those mediators that have ties, and they are important to bring into the negotiation table because they can put pressure on the parties. They have particular ability to use leverage on the parties to actually get them to the table and make necessary concessions. But even these mediators need to, in the process, be relatively have a degree of fairness. So it's a question here about allowing mediators with ties to be involved, but also ensuring fairness of the process.
I think we have time for one more question or so. Yes. Let's make it you two then. We'll make time, so go ahead. Please say who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, my name is Alexandra. I come from Operation 1325. It's actually a follow-up question to that. It's about bias mediator, but more insurgency bias. Is there any research on that, Mr. Isaac or the fort?
Isaac, do you want to start comment?
Yes, there are research on this, so there is an important, and one important aspect of rebel-biased mediators is, of course, to try to increase the relative asymmetry that usually occur in conflicts. So there is an inherent asymmetry in that one side is a state side and the other one is a non-state, non-recognized side. And therefore there could be instances where a particular mediator that have ties to the rebel side could be important. I was mentioning that the case of Philippines that had an agreement in 2014. And you could see that Malaysia, that had particular ties to the rebel side, provided an important role in that process. So I think that is an important point.
Anything from you to add? No? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Karin Nor. I work for Firm Seat. I'm a Somali diaspora officer. My question relates to all of you. I know Sweden have been very active and drivers for the peace processes and reconciliation in Somalia. Many different aspects and many times. And we know that a lot of times women and youth was not part of it. So my question is how Sweden government can more pressure, put a pressure for Somali government, and now October is election in Somalia. How can Sweden put pressure on Somalia and to be more, not only be part of the peace and reconciliation, but women and youth, but also put in the constitution. We know the constitution states women 30%, but in reality it's hardly 10%. Thank you very much.
Good question, because it also touches upon several of these panelists, which are very smartly put. Perhaps State Secretary, would you like to comment? Is it?
Yes. Well, I hope that we will see elections in Somalia, and we actually discussed on this very specific topic. Well, it's very, very important and specific topic of the percentage of women. But then, I mean, the understanding, I think, of many actors there was that let's make it 30%, and even this, as you say, it's quite a high number as compared to the traditional leadership that you see in Somalia, and let's make it for real. It's quite an ambitious goal, and let's make this happen, but in a good way, also of quality. And I think that we do. I mean, Somalia is one of the countries where we have the development cooperation focusing both on long-term and humanitarian, and the bridge between humanitarian and long-term support, and also then always focusing on participation of women. But I do believe, as even in this, that we need to focus and bring in also the quite recent resolution 2250 of young people as part also of the instrument of the international dialogue that we use very frequently in Somalia, stressing the importance of local ownership in the process, of coordination between all actors working on security but also development, and long-term engagement, which is needed. So we are very eager and hope that we will see a peaceful and fair election. And it's a transitional process. It's not really one person, one vote, but it's really a step towards future in Somalia, where we will have real elections next time.
Thank you. Dr. McCallum, having worked the Horn of Africa and Somalia for quite a while, what do you say? What can be done?
I think it needs to happen on a number of levels. There are many barriers to women involvement in peace processes in Somalia. There's cultural, there's religious, there's economic. So it needs to be at all levels. The Life and Peace Institute, we have worked with women's groups, women's dialogue groups, in Kismayo and in the southwest, and we're trying to increase women at that level to be more engaged. And it's a real challenge, even with our women's partner, a women's organization. Even within that group, you have people who are resistant to their wives traveling, so there's all those cultural and religious issues that have to be addressed. There's, of course, the Constitution is very critical, creating the legal space for women as well. So it has to happen from the grassroots to the legal level, and just creating the platforms for women's voices to come through clearly where they're not always welcome. But they will come, as space is created, as women's voices are heard, it will create more space for more women to be involved.
Thank you. And I noticed you added the Constitution thing in there, so I'm going to turn to the ambassador here to ask if this is a typical case, if it's reminiscent of Syria in that case, that the Constitution and an inclusive Constitution is actually going to be a measure of success for the inclusion in the peace process. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree to that. The degree of inclusion of women's issues and women's rights into the Constitution, and then following that the legislation, will be, of course, a sign of success. Now the road is very, very long still, of course, but there are very many Syrian women organizations that are quite active. I see a problem sometimes because this very often elite women are living abroad. They're not living in South Syria. So the bonds between them and the grassroots level are not that strong many times. So there's lots to be done actually to connect them with the real events on the ground. Now, in the Women's Advisory Board, there are women from inside Syria who come and go with the risk of their lives sometimes. But in other fora, no, they are living outside. That is a little bit of a handicap, I believe. But if I may say something totally different,
sure.
I think that Sweden will have a good chance when we get into the Security Council in January to have easier possibilities to connect with countries that have an importance now, in my case, Syria, that are playing a role in Syria. There are so many countries playing a role in Syria. And with having a seat in the Security Council, I believe that's a very good starting point for Sweden to be able to affect the outcome of this crisis.
Thank you for ending this conversation with a note of hope. I would like to continue this conversation, of course, but unfortunately our time draws close. It's even a little bit past. I'm soon going to leave the floor to our FBA Director General, Sven-Erik Söder, for a few closing remarks. But first, I would like to invite you in thanking our guests for having taken their time and sharing their knowledge with us and making sure this afternoon was valuable for all. So thank you very much. And as a special token of friendship, I would like to extend, in place of arms, the special FBA pen instead. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Director General.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you all for an excellent and utmost interesting discussion this afternoon. I think we are all of the same opinion. Let me just say a few words about the pen in place of arms. It's not a coincidence that we have decided to put this inscription on a giveaway pen. In place of arms is the title of a book published by Folke Bernadotte after his experiences in the end of the Second World War in Germany. And I read an article in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and the writer, the journalist, said that the pen of Abu Mazen is much, much more dangerous for Israeli politicians today compared to the weapons of Arafat some years back. And then we thought about it, and then we said, wow, I mean, we are not using weapons, we are using pens. Why don't we put in place of arms on our giveaway pen? So that's the history, the reason that we decided to put this inscription on the pen. My ambition is not to try to summarize what has been said during this afternoon, but just during a few minutes I would like to share with you what I am taking with me from this discussion. I fully agree with you, Professor Svensson, when you said that you prefer to focus on the possibilities, the opportunities, instead of focusing on all problems that we have in front of us. And I think absolutely that is the right approach. And Ambassador Alanio Holst said also that you are a born optimist. And I think also that's the right approach. Because if we focus too much on the problems and the dark clouds that we can see in the sky, I think it's very easy to be paralyzed and not being able to carry out the important work that we have in front of us. And when I listen to you this afternoon, besides that it's important to be an optimist, I'm really also appreciating that the international society, the international community have decided to go ahead after the so-called Millennium Goals with a new agenda, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, or the 2030 Goals. For us in the Folke Bernadotte Academy, with our focus on peace and security and development, we have decided to focus on Goal 16, on peace and security, and of course, Goal 5, on gender issues in general. And I can assure you that we are prepared to do whatever we can in order to contribute to the implementation of those goals. I taking also with me the focus you have, Professor Svensson, on research and development, because my experience is that it's so easy to be dragged away by emotions, feelings, and we can meet a lot of just opinions out there. But if we can base what we are doing, what we are thinking, what we are saying on research and development and evidence-based facts, much is really won. And in our academy, in our government agency, we have also a certain program on research and development. And we are trying the best we can to base our activities and our work on evidence-based facts and realities. Finally, it goes without saying that it's so important to do what is possible to work in an inclusive way. We have our 1325 program, we have our gender program, we work hard on gender integration in our organization. But I think it's also high time, as State Secretary Modé said, that we also focus on the young generation. And there is also a resolution, as you rightly said, concerning the young generation. And in our academy, I think it's really high time also for us to think of in what way we can include this perspective in our work as well. Well, the time is running, and it's already 3:10. And before I conclude, I would also like to, before I finish, I would also like to draw your attention to an exhibition we have here in the building. I'm not sure if you have seen it already, but when you are going out here, and on the other side of the corridor, on a huge balcony, there is a piece of art, actually, with the name Mission in Motion. And we are very proud to have this piece of art here in this building, because it was made or produced originally to be shown or displayed in the United Nations headquarters. The Folke Bernadotte Academy is the host organization for an international network called the Challenges Forum. It's a network with partners from many countries all over the world, including politics, academia, peacekeeping training centers, so on and so forth. And when this network organization celebrated the 20th anniversary early this year, they decided to produce this piece of art. And it is produced by Färgfabriken here in Stockholm with kindly support from the private sector, the Lindén-gruppen. So this is an example of private-public partnership, maybe in a different way than we usually think of. It's not that common that private companies is supporting peace or peace efforts, but we are very proud that we have this cooperation with Färgfabriken and Lindén-gruppen. So please have a look at this piece of art, Mission in Motion. Finally, you're all welcome to our mingle outside here. If everything is in place, we will get some mingle food and some soft drinks. So you will have plenty of time to talk to each other and continue this interesting discussion that we have had this afternoon. So once again, thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us, and please have a nice weekend.